I knew something was off when my dad started asking about the exact dates of my honeymoon. At first, I thought it was harmless curiosity. Parents like to know where their kids are going, maybe brag a little to friends. But the way he pressed for the itinerary, down to the departure times, didn't sit right with me. I was 30, finally married, finally taking a break after years of teaching high school English. My husband and I had chosen Orlando, partly for the theme parks, partly because neither of us had ever been. It wasn't an exotic island getaway, but it was ours. We wanted to feel like kids again, ride roller coasters, eat overpriced churros, and not think about lesson plans or family obligations. Dad had always been involved. Growing up, he hovered over every science project, every school play, every decision that should have been mine. When I moved out, I thought things would shift. In some ways they did. He stopped dropping by unannounced, at least. But he still found ways to insert himself, like sending me long texts about how I should handle parent-teacher conferences, even though I'd been running my own classroom for years. When he started hinting about how fun it would be to join us in Florida, I laughed it off. I thought he was joking. I even told my husband later that night, rolling my eyes, saying, "Can you imagine?" We both laughed, because the idea of sharing a honeymoon with my dad was absurd. But the jokes kept coming, then turned into questions about what hotels we were looking at, whether we'd booked fast passes for rides, if we had considered renting a car. His tone was half playful, half serious, and I felt that old familiar knot in my stomach, the one that always came when Dad blurred the line between support and intrusion. At the time, I brushed it aside. I had wedding planning to focus on, lesson plans to prep before I left, and honestly, I didn't want to believe he'd crossed that kind of boundary. Honeymoons are sacred, right? Surely even he knew that. I didn't realize until later that he had already set a plan in motion. The first sign came a week after the wedding. My husband and I were sitting on the couch surrounded by half-open wedding gifts when an envelope slid out from between two wrapped boxes. It wasn't a card, no sweet note from a family friend. It was a reservation confirmation from a resort in Orlando. At the top was my dad's name. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he'd sent us the wrong envelope, or maybe he was surprising us with an upgrade. But then I noticed the dates. They matched our honeymoon week exactly, and the room type was identical to ours. That sinking feeling in my chest told me everything I didn't want to admit. This wasn't an accident. I didn't say anything to my husband right away. I needed time to process it. Instead, I called Dad the next day and asked casually if he had any plans for the summer. His voice lit up. He told me he'd decided to treat himself and finally take a vacation. He mentioned Orlando like it was nothing, like it hadn't been our special destination for months. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "that's where we're going for the honeymoon." "I know," he answered, as if that explained it. "Wouldn't it be fun to bump into each other? We could have dinner one night." I couldn't believe how casually he said it, like it was the most normal thing in the world. My hand shook as I held the phone. All my life, I tried to carve out a little independence, and here he was, booking himself into the middle of the one trip that was supposed to be just for me and my husband. I hung up quickly, claiming I had papers to grade, even though school was over. The lie gave me cover, but my mind was racing. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to decide if this was another case of him being clueless or something more. When I finally told my husband, he just stared at me in disbelief. "He'd booked the same hotel? During the same week?" he asked. I nodded. "Why would he do that?" I didn't have an answer, but deep down I knew. This wasn't just coincidence. Dad wasn't planning on bumping into us. He was planning on being part of the trip. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure how far he was willing to go. The next few days were filled with half conversations and unfinished thoughts. I kept wanting to confront Dad, but every time I picked up the phone, I hesitated. I'd grown up trained to manage his moods, to avoid outright conflict, to keep the peace. It was like muscle memory. But this time it wasn't just about me. It was about my husband too, and about the first real trip of our married life. My husband wasn't shy about his feelings. "This is insane," he said one night while we folded laundry. "It's our honeymoon. He shouldn't even be in the same state, let alone the same resort." He wasn't angry at me, but I could feel the tension in his voice. It stung, because I knew he was right. The final confirmation came in the form of a group text. Dad sent a message to me, my husband, and even my younger sister, a screenshot of his flight details. He'd booked the same airline, same day, just 2 hours after our flight. His caption read, "Looks like we'll be traveling buddies," with a bunch of cheerful emojis. My sister texted me privately right after. "Is he serious? On your honeymoon?" She was as baffled as I was, but she also told me not to expect him to back down easily. She knew him as well as I did. When Dad set his mind on something, he rarely changed course. I spent the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Part of me wanted to believe he just didn't understand boundaries, that maybe he thought he was being supportive, or funny, or somehow helpful. But another part of me, the part that had been worn down by years of his interference, knew better. He wasn't clueless. He just didn't think the rules applied to him. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee until it went cold. My husband sat across from me, waiting for me to say something. Finally, he spoke. "We can't just let this happen," he said. "We have to decide what to do." And in that moment, I realized he was right. Avoiding the confrontation wasn't an option anymore. If I didn't draw the line here, I never would. I dialed his number that afternoon, rehearsing in my head what I'd say. My voice came out shakier than I wanted when he picked up. "Dad, we need to talk about Orlando." He sounded cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "Great, I was hoping to go over some dining reservations I found. There's a steakhouse." "Dad," I cut in, firmer this time, "you can't come on our honeymoon." The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to make me doubt myself. Then he laughed, as if I'd said something ridiculous. "I'm not coming on your honeymoon. I'm just vacationing in the same city. Orlando's huge. We won't even run into each other unless you want to." My chest tightened. "You booked the same resort, the same week, and even lined up your flights with ours. That's not a coincidence." His voice shifted, softer but stubborn. "Sweetheart, I just wanted to celebrate with you. It's a big moment. Why are you making it sound like I'm intruding?" "Because you are," I wanted to yell, but years of swallowing that impulse made it hard to get the words out. Instead, I said, "Dad, this trip is for me and my husband. Just us. That's what a honeymoon is." He sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "You've always been so dramatic. I'll do my own thing. You'll barely notice I'm there." That was the breaking point. My husband, who had been listening with his arms crossed, mouthed, "Enough." I agreed. I told Dad flatly that if he insisted on going, we'd cancel. I couldn't believe I was saying it, but the words came out steady. "It won't be a honeymoon if you're there. Either you change your plans, or we change ours." He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just said, in a clipped tone I knew too well, "We'll see," and hung up. The line went dead, but the problem was far from over. I could already feel it. He wasn't going to back down. And now it was up to me to decide how far I was willing to push back. The following week was a blur of tense conversations and awkward silences. Dad acted as if nothing had happened, sending me links to restaurants and park attractions like he was part of the planning committee. My husband grew more frustrated with every message that popped up on my phone. He kept asking why I didn't just block Dad's number, but it wasn't that simple. Blocking him would have felt like slamming a door I wasn't sure I was ready to close. At school, I caught myself zoning out during meetings, thinking about Orlando instead of the upcoming semester. The trip had gone from something joyful to something stressful, and that shift was eating at me. I'd worked so hard to keep boundaries with Dad, yet here I was again, letting him take over. Then my sister called. "He's telling people at church that he's going to Florida for your honeymoon," she said. "Like, actually bragging about it." Everyone's confused. Hearing that nearly made me drop my phone. It wasn't just private anymore, he'd made it public. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. He wasn't clueless. He was proud of what he was doing, like he was proving a point. That night, my husband and I sat down at the kitchen table with our laptops open. "We can't keep waiting for him to change his mind," he said. "He won't. We need to decide for ourselves." We scrolled through alternative destinations. Nashville, San Diego, even a quiet cabin in the Smokies. Each option felt like admitting defeat, but also like taking back control. The idea of spending my honeymoon checking over my shoulder for my dad made me sick. I stared at the glowing screen, my cursor hovering over a new set of flights, and I knew a choice had to be made. Either I accepted Dad's presence and let him wedge himself into this once-in-a-lifetime trip, or I pulled the plug and started over. Neither option felt easy, but one of them felt necessary. The decision came to a head 2 days later. Dad called while I was driving home from the grocery store. His voice was upbeat, almost smug. "So, I snagged tickets for that fireworks show at the park. Thought we could all go together, my treat." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm, "you're not listening. This is our honeymoon. You weren't invited." He chuckled, like I was just being playful. "Relax. I'm not crashing your honeymoon. I'm just nearby. You'll be glad I'm there if something goes wrong. Who else will look out for you?" That line hit me. It was the same argument he'd used my whole life, wrapped in the guise of protection. But I wasn't a teenager sneaking out past curfew. I was a married adult, and I didn't need him to look out for me. On my honeymoon, when I got home, I told my husband about the call. He didn't hesitate. "We cancel. We go somewhere else. Let him waste his money sitting in Florida alone." His voice was firm, but I could see the disappointment too. He'd been excited for the parks, the shows, the trip we'd imagined. Still, he knew what I knew. Letting Dad steamroll this moment would set the tone for everything that came after. That night, I drafted a message. It wasn't long, but every word felt like lifting a weight. "Dad, we've decided to change our honeymoon plans. Please don't contact us about the trip again." I showed it to my husband before hitting send. His nod gave me the last push. I stared at the screen after it sent, waiting for the reply. None came that night. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt like relief, but underneath it, I knew it was only temporary. He wouldn't take this quietly. The reply came the next morning. A single paragraph, sharp and guilt-laden, written the way only my dad could manage. "I can't believe you would exclude your own father like this. After everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices, I only wanted to share in your happiness. You'll regret treating me this way." I read it 3 times, each sentence digging into me. The old reflexes kicked in: shame, doubt, the urge to smooth things over before conflict escalated. But then my husband put his hand on mine and said, "Don't answer. Not this time." That day at school, while students wandered the halls picking up schedules, I kept thinking about boundaries. I told my own students all the time about owning their choices, about not letting peer pressure define them. Yet here I was, at 30, still shrinking under my dad's pressure. The contradiction made me angry, and for once, that anger felt useful. By evening, Dad had escalated to calling. First twice, then 5 times in an hour. I let each one go to voicemail. The messages shifted in tone, from casual disappointment to sharp warnings about family loyalty. My husband listened to one and shook his head. "He's trying to wear you down. He knows if he keeps at it, you'll fold." For the first time, I didn't fold. I turned my phone off, something I'd never done before. The quiet in our apartment felt almost foreign, like a room that had been locked for years finally opened. We booked the new trip that night. A week in San Diego, far enough away, different enough that Dad couldn't shadow it. As the confirmation email came through, a wave of relief hit me, followed quickly by fear. Relief, because the honeymoon was ours again. Fear, because I knew Dad wouldn't just let this go. And sure enough, when I turned my phone back on the next day, there was another message waiting, one that showed just how far he was willing to push. The message wasn't angry this time. It was calculated. Dad wrote that he'd already booked his Orlando trip and wasn't going to cancel just because we'd decided to be difficult. He added that he hoped we'd come to our senses and join him anyway, because he'd hate to see our plans wasted. That line told me everything. He wasn't just disappointed. We were supposed to adjust to his decision. He couldn't imagine a world where he didn't get to be part of it. My husband read the text and looked at me squarely. "He's daring us. If we cave, this won't stop here. Every holiday, every vacation, every milestone, it'll all be about what he wants." He was right. And yet, part of me still wavered. Canceling the Orlando trip had already felt like a loss, even though we'd rebooked. I hated the idea of my dad sitting there in Florida, smug that he'd driven us out. It felt like giving him the win. But then my sister called again. She'd overheard him telling a family friend that he was teaching me a lesson about how family comes first. That word, lesson, snapped something in me. I wasn't a child sitting at his kitchen table anymore. I was an adult, and this was my marriage. So I doubled down. I sent him one more message, short and final. We aren't changing our plans again. Please stop. No explanations, no apologies, no cracks for him to slip through. That night, as I packed a small bag for San Diego, I finally allowed myself to feel excited again. Sunsets on the beach, tacos by the pier, time alone with my husband. But even in that calm, I knew this wasn't just about the trip. It was about whether I could stand firm when Dad pushed back harder than he ever had before. And I was about to find out, because 2 days later, he showed up at my front door. I opened the door and there he was, suitcase in hand, standing like a man who had every right to be there. I figured we should talk face to face, he said, brushing past me into the living room before I could answer. My husband looked up from the couch, his expression tightening. Dad set his suitcase down like a challenge. You're making a mistake. Orlando was supposed to be our celebration. I already paid for everything. Do you have any idea how much money I've spent? That old tactic, guilt through obligation, hit me square in the chest. I'd grown up hearing about sacrifices, about how much he'd done for me. But now, standing in my own apartment, I realized how much power I'd been giving him just by listening. I took a breath. Dad, this isn't about money. It's not about you celebrating. It's about me and my husband. Our honeymoon is not yours to be part of. He scoffed, pacing. After all I've given you, this is how you repay me? By shutting me out? Family doesn't do that. My husband stood, his voice calm but firm. This isn't shutting you out. This is us starting our marriage without interference. You have to respect that. For a moment, I thought Dad would explode. His jaw worked, his hands balled into fists at his sides. But instead of shouting, he shook his head slowly, disappointment dripping from every word. You're ungrateful, both of you. He picked up his suitcase and walked toward the door, but not before turning back to deliver the sting. Don't come crying to me when you realize how much you've thrown away. The door closed behind him with a heavy click. My whole body trembled, not from fear, but from release. For the first time, I hadn't folded. I'd held the line. But as I leaned into my husband's shoulder, one truth sat heavy in my chest. Holding the line had cost me something too, and I knew the price would follow me long after the honeymoon ended. San Diego felt like freedom. The first morning we woke up to the sound of waves instead of notifications on my phone, I finally exhaled. We wandered the boardwalk, ate fish tacos, and watched the sun dip into the ocean, the sky painted in colors Orlando could never give us. For the first time since the wedding, I wasn't bracing for my dad's next move. Still, he lingered in the background. While my husband napped one afternoon, I scrolled through my messages. Dozens of missed calls, long texts dripping with guilt, and even one email with the subject line, "Last Chance," sat there, unread. I closed the screen before I could spiral back into the old patterns. I reminded myself that ignoring him wasn't cruelty, it was survival. The truth was, I missed parts of him. The version of Dad who once cheered me on at school plays, who told bad jokes at the dinner table, who believed in my teaching before I even did. But those moments lived alongside the controlling version, the one who couldn't imagine a boundary he didn't get to cross. On our last night, my husband and I sat on the sand, watching the tide roll in. He squeezed my hand and said, "We made the right choice." And I knew he was right. The trip wasn't what we had originally planned, but it was ours, untouched, unclaimed, and finally free from anyone else's agenda. When we flew home, I knew the fallout with Dad wasn't over. There would be more difficult conversations, maybe even distance that lasted years. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, I'd chosen my own path, even when it meant disappointing him. And as bittersweet as it was, that choice gave me something I'd been searching for all along. The proof that I could draw a hard line and keep it.